Hi guys, welcome to episode 7 of the journey of Elaina, slowly getting towards the end of the season. This week's episode, we've kind of gone back to the split episode formula that we had before the last two where we've had people coming back. Technically, we do get to see some of our favourite characters, but there's no initial interactions between them with Elaina. But it's definitely another really good episode. The link between the two stories is very clear this week. Quickly, before we get going with our breakdown, thank you guys so much. We have hit 200 subs. I am so happy. I have created a Discord server, able to use the server to tell you guys if there's a delay, things are being moved around, if there's anything going on. Also great to talk to you guys about more in detail bits and pieces and just generally chat. I intend to have it build up into something bigger and better as we get bigger, but for now it is a great place, even if anything, for you guys just to check if a video is delayed or what videos are going out and when. Head on over, the link is hopefully on the screen quite now. This week also marked the first week where I introduced the anime question of the week feature. This week's question, guys, is who is your favourite red-headed character? Comment below and I will be picking an answer to shout out about next week. Who is your favourite red-headed character, guys? Answer down below in the comments and I will pick a favourite. This week we have two stories. Our first story is The Wall Etched by Many Travellers, which is our initial open. We get a young Elaina reading from the book of Nikki. She starts to read about a country who did not get on. There's a left side, a right side, I didn't get on, so they decided we're not going to have any dealings with one another and they built a wall. Kind of sounds a bit familiar. Just a quick nod to her dad in this scene, who is eating a quiche, just because I haven't quite got over the formula for my Moriarty releases. I generally talk about all the food going on. It's a quiche, if you are not familiar with what a quiche is. I do think this anime is set somewhere in mock Europe, to say the least, and I've got a few more kind of giveaways this episode, which makes me think it's more of a mock Europe, because obviously the quiche. Don't know if quiche is a thing in Asia. And we now transition to a witch who I initially thought was Elaina. It apparently isn't Elaina, it is Nikki. But if you guys remember me last episode, I put my tin hat on and I started screaming about Nikki being Elena's mum. This week's episode really didn't help me and I'm really now screaming on the rooftop, banging my pans, going, did you know that Elena's mum is Nikki? Just to kind of shut me up this season, if we can end on the fact that we find out that her mum is Nikki, I will be so happy. It's just so obvious at this point. Elaina even gets mistaken for Nikki. I didn't need any more evidence, but you've given me plenty. With our transition, we see her standing in front of this giant wall. Attack on Titan, guys. I know it's coming up in a month now. So Attack on Titan, I think, airs 7th of December. This is a shot of her looking up at it. I'm waiting for the Colossal Titan to creep up over the wall and smash everything. But no, I am very excited to see Attack on Titan coming back. Nice little segue to promote Attack on Titan. The witch, who is apparently Nikki, or the travelling witch, is in front of the wall. And a gentleman asks her, do you think it's pointless that their two sides really don't get on, so they made a wall? But surely it's better than a war. If anything, if your countries really don't get on with one another, or if you've got people who don't get on, maybe ignoring them is probably the best method instead of actually killing people. It's what came to mind when he did ask whether I thought it was pointless. He then asks her, have you got any ideas? Where she asks, can I borrow your knife? She starts to carve some words into the wall. And it says, this side of the country is great by the Witch of Travels. It's essentially a Yelp review, the first Yelp review ever left, and graffiti at the same time. She says the wall represents the separation between you two. It represents how wonderful you believe this side is, so you should have visitors carve words into the wall, aka Yelp review. It really is just leave you a comment on the wall. So the guy wasn't initially keen, where she's like, did you know the other side already has this done? And the other side is already having traveller reviews on their wall, which kind of triggers him to go, yeah, I'll do it. Because obviously you're sparking a competition between the two. You're sparking the competitiveness. So they'll be like, yeah, well, my side's the best. So we will get more reviews. And she pops over to the other side and does exactly the same. And this became a tradition in the two countries that people who would visit the countries would etch their reviews, their words into the wall. And we can hear the young Elaina now reading. I almost wondered if at one point that she was visualizing herself in Nikki's position. I don't think that's the case in the slightest, because of what happens a bit later on. So it's just a little note on the side I've got. Is this Nikki? Maybe she's telling a story and she's visualizing herself in the story. I still think Nikki is Elena's mum. I do think it's a bit odd as well, though, that obviously they are leaving reviews on one side of the wall, but they can't see the other side. So this tradition will go on and on and on, but they're never going to know who has the most reviews without going to the other side themselves and having a look. They can ask a traveller, have we got more than the other side? But then they have to trust that traveller's not telling a lie. How do you gauge a competition like this? So very interesting, and I do wonder if that was actually Nikki's original plan anyways, because she knew that eventually they would have to get over it or go to the other side, and they would have to start talking to one another again about it. We then see young Elaina asking her mum what was the point of carving words into the wall, where she's like, maybe it's a popularity competition, it allows them to brag about their sides, where Elena's like, which side had more views? Her mum's like, you're going to have to see it for yourself. Which leads us to the modern day, but this time, instead of seeing who I thought would be Elaina, we actually see Saya come back. And we get our Easter egg again. I have said recently the episodes are starting to bring back characters. I mentioned last week the 3 men who were from the episode with the Magic Academy where everyone's doing magic in the streets. These 3 men carving words into walls which says this country's great for our muscles. Those 3 men are the same men who were doing magic in the Academy episode, and they were present last week where we had the Country of Truth who were too scared to say anything. They were also present in that. It's quite nice to have these repeating characters coming back. We have Saya, who is now also back again, where she is working for the United Witches Association, and she's approached by the same man from before, where he tells her, I want you to do something about the wall. It's been 10 years, people have been carving words into the wall, but people are now starting to lose interest, and he wants something new. And again, she says, can I borrow your knife? This guy lending out his knives. It really looks like she's starting to do a curse where she writes, I love Miss Elaina over and over and over again. I mean, she is obsessed. Sure, I think Saya works as a comic relief. I just find her a bit too much. Well, the guy has to stop her because it really does look like she's making a curse more than anything else. Saya says, why don't you change the rule? So instead of having just travellers come in and carve words onto the wall, why don't you make it a place where the people of this country can carve their own thoughts onto the wall as well? So they can they can confess their love like she is doing, or they can write down their hopes for the future. And she says, well, you're the ones who built the wall. Why don't you make this wall for you? Make it for yourselves. Make it to point your way forward. And that's when she vanishes and says, I've got a job to do on the other side of the wall, which is basically tells them to do exactly the same thing. We do see the 2 old men on each side who are acting as the town officials. Maybe they're both at that same point where they think they need to do something different, because they do say that they're the same country and they are progressing at the same level because they are one, essentially. They were technically one country. We now cut to our girl flying with some geese, and she's very excited. She's like, this is it. She's finally seen the country that was alluded to in these stories. The stories that Nikki told inspired Elaina to become who she is. They've also allowed her to go travelling. And the wall is gone. And I don't know how long this took after Saya's little advice. It has to at least been like a few months or something. We'll say it's a few months later to be generous. We can see people are now selling the bricks as mementos, trying to make some money back. And I have put, you have to blame Saya for this. Saya has destroyed the wall, which is probably a good thing. I mean, we can blame Saya for tearing down the wall which divided the 2. And this is when Elaina is mistaken for the travelling witch. And that's obviously in case I had any doubts that it might have been her from the opening story and just putting her reading it as herself. It's not. It really is a different witch. And I really do think it is her mum. I believe Nikki is her mother. They work out that it's not her by basically suggesting that she's younger than before and she's got smaller boobs. I do believe her mum has a bigger chest size, and also Elaina is definitely younger, so it would make sense for her not to have a big chest size. Where Elaina asked them, why did you tear the wall down? And I was putting capital letters because this is Saya's doing. The people on the wall basically started to abuse the ability to carve and write on the wall. What they would be drunk, or they would go, I love such and such, or I hate this person, or they would write insults And then people would read this and then get really, really angry. Like, oh no, I broke up with him, and start scratching out the names. Or I was drunk, I didn't mean it, and start scratching out that name. Or people would start attacking the wall because it was embarrassing to look at it. So the wall became a symbol of embarrassment instead of being a symbol of hope or a symbol of bragging about how wonderful the country was, where both sides end up taking down the wall. So obviously the same Sayer's given the same advice to the other side, and they've both ended up scratching away at the wall enough for the wall to break apart. They no longer felt this resentment towards one another, and they actually joined in forces to remove the wall. I mean, we see it's both sides who are selling the bricks. In the end, they didn't need a wall. And Elaina asks before they leave which side had the most carvings, had the most praises on it. I got worried. I was like, no, if you ask this, are they going to start fighting? Like, I did. But they didn't. They actually both say the same. We are the same country. We worked as hard as one another. Both, so they had the same number of praises on the wall, or they didn't want to get into an argument. I do like the fact that they are keeping Nikki's original graffiti as a momentum, up as a memorial site almost, where Elaina is disappointed. I guess it worked out for the best. We end on quite a nice little piece of information where a country isn't for the tourists. A country is for the people who live within it, which is really, really nice. And obviously, my channel once upon a time was a travelling channel, and I do like that. I never considered the town built for my pleasure, more just to see how other people would live, just to see what the country offered for the people living within it. I think I heavily agree that towns shouldn't be built for people outside. It should be built for the people who are inside and have to live there day in and day out. She also ends on a bit of a kind of ponder where, did Nikki carve the words knowing that one day that this would eventually happen? She knew that one day that they would have to talk to each other. Did she know that one day that they would end up tearing the wall down, that the wall was just going to be a temporary thing? We end on Elaina buying a memento off the wall. So she does buy a brick in the end anyway. It's a little chunk which says Elai. It's the beginning of her name, like Elaina. And it's part of Saya's love scribble. Saya has kind of got her wish that her love token, or her wish into the wall for Elaina to kind of confess her feelings. Elaina has got that piece of brick, so it worked in a sense. Let's now cut to a second story, which 100% still had links, and it definitely was linked to the first story in a sense that the theme of this week's episode is divides and people overcoming division. This week's episode definitely focuses on, we see two halves which don't agree, which are divided. Then they come together, overcoming their differences to overcome a division, and it works out for the best. That is the theme I believe this week's episode is pointing at. Where this next section is the grape stomping girl. And we take place in a vineyard. It really does give me that European feel again. I know I've said it a few times how this could be set in Europe if it wanted to be. Obviously, it's not. It is set in a world many, many moons away, a world which is like ours, but not our world at the same time. It's a world where magic exists, but it could be. It definitely gave me that feel of France, Germany, with the many vineyards stretching down rivers. A few years ago, definitely on the channel somewhere, I took a road trip. So I arrived in Nuremberg and I left at Dusseldorf. So I did a cross-country trip via the car, and we basically followed a map. We didn't have any plans. We would book a hotel as we came to the cities that we found interesting. And it does remind me of that trip where we ended up near Würzburg and Koblenz. So Würzburg has a castle, and it's in like a valley, so there's a river going through it. But it's surrounded by vineyards, just like this. It definitely reminded me of the vineyards. Really did like Würzburg. Würzburg was nice. We now centre on a grandson who is talking to his grandpa, and he is showing off his new outfit to wear for a grape throwing festival, where he turns and asks him, where did the festival come from? Well, I'm glad you asked, my boy, because this is our story for the week. Once upon a time, two villagers. We've got this village, that village. Makes it nice and simple, I guess. And before the two were peaceful, they used to fight. During the harvest period, a witch came to visit, which is our girl Elaina. She arrives in this village. So she's in this village. And she meets the village. I'm going to call him Gramps just because he's Gramps. She meets him. It is said that the two villages are both famous for their wines, obviously. They're set in vineyards. What else would they be famous for? Although vinegar as well. We can see all around the hut where Elaina is talking to Gramps, the boys are looking in through the windows. Because I did even put at one point, is it only men who live here? It's not, there are women. It does lead to a food fight, essentially. And it is the women who are not involved, who just kind of get angry and just kind of don't take part in this episode's nonsense. Where Elaina tells us that she's never had wine before and she wants to taste alcohol for the first time. So she wants something special. And she's come here because the wine is apparently meant to be really, really good. I hate wine, so I am not with Elaina here. To be fair, most people in the UK, their first alcohol tends to be an alcopop or something. Wine doesn't strike me as a beginner's alcohol to drink. Where Gramps says our wine is amazing, it was made by the gods, it tastes absolutely great. He's holding this bottle of wine, where she asks, is that the wine from this village? Where he's like, oh, no, this wine is from that village. On the front of this wine bottle, obviously you'd get many areas will have their own labels, their own logos. We see a grape stomping maiden, Rosemary, from that village. She's quite your typical kind of beautiful red hair. She's kind of standing happily in a wooden barrel. I don't know what these things are called. She's just standing in a bucket of grapes. And we see the Gramps getting more and more upset because they're now using Rosemary on the label. The sales are now increasing on that village. Rosemary is written as the place of origin on the labels. As he says, it's a fetish, I guess, kind of. Where he says people are buying this wine because they believe that the wine is coming from Rosemary. Well, it isn't. Rosemary, if you want to pretend, is stomping on the wine. The wine comes from the country. You normally put down the origin, France. And it's selling well because it's got a cute girl stepping lovingly onto grapes. Seems a little bit too attached to his bottle that he can read it all off to Elaina. Elaina says, why don't you try competing? Why don't you get your own cute girl to step lovingly onto some grapes? I felt like Elaina was asking for him to pick her anyway, but then she seems really kind of nervous when he does pick her. Because I feel like she was saying, get a cute girl, and then she was going me, because we know that Elaina thinks she's pretty, and Elaina has got high opinions of herself. So I was like, why are you so shocked that he's asking you? That's kind of what I feel like you wanted. Where he asks her to do the honours, and she doesn't really get a chance to answer when he's like, she said yes, and we get boys pouring in the window, pouring in the doors, and that's just when I was like, this village is predominantly men, and one of them is even like, please step on me. This story is a bit of a weird one. But there are women. I even note the women in the background who are very angry. They're kind of annoyed that the men are gawking over this girl. And we finally get to see a costume change. I'm a big fan of costume changes. I like Elaina in this outfit, but it definitely doesn't suit her. It doesn't suit her as much as her witchy attire. Elaina is wearing the village traditional great stomping attire. It's quite nice to see her wearing a different colour. She's wearing red. She kind of takes quite a bit of a bashing this episode. Rosemary just appears before Elaina even gets a chance to step foot on the grapes. She addresses Gramps, calls him the elder of the village that is dying out, where she spots that he's holding a bottle and then goes, do you want me to sign it for you? Where she then notices Elaina and calls her undersized. She also says she's a Finn, and she starts to insult Elaina. Elaina takes quite the bashing this week, where she's like, her face is okay and her figure is very childlike. She kind of is a child. To be fair, as soon as I saw what Rosemary looked like in person, there isn't really any competition here. And I don't mean this in a mean way. I just mean this in the sense that when people drink wine, are you going to pick a child, or are you going to pick the one who's definitely an adult, who looks very pretty, who is stepping on the wine and looks very happy and very happy? Obviously, it's not Elena's fault that she ends up getting so insulted she turns into a bit of a grape stomping devil. But at the same time, to promote your brand, I kind of figure I know what I would want to promote my brand. Rosemary is made out to be quite the loving figure as she's lovingly stepping on it, and apparently she's lovingly stepping on grapes morning to midnight, which obviously isn't the case. I just felt like there wasn't really any competition between the two. And Elaina is just angry. She is just so angry, and she turns around to him and she's like, I'll do it. I will be your grape stamping maiden. She turns into a literal demon, where she starts to emit this purple aura from her. And as she's stamping angrily on these grapes. Rest in peace, grapes. And she must be visualizing Rosemary as these grapes. She is screaming, die, 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 over and over again. And they take a picture of her, and it's not quite the same appeal. I mean, you're not really going to be selling much wine with the picture that they took. It's hilariously funny. I love this picture of her, but it doesn't make me go, I must buy this brand. There's an angry child on the front. After this scenario and Elaina is worn out, she does ask how much wine would that have made, where we do get a bit of information that it would only really make half a cask, so it wouldn't really make that much wine. And that is when she gets a little bit dubious, where she's like, how much wine is Rosemary selling? Where he tells her it's hundreds, sometimes even thousands perhaps. She even says, and she's stomping on the wine morning to night. And she says, don't you think that's a little bit strange? Because it doesn't quite add up. The maths doesn't add up here. If what we saw Elaina doing only made about half a cask, it's a little bit odd that Rosemary is somehow making as much as she is to keep up supply and demand. They go and investigate Rosemary's in that village, where we can see the truth. Rosemary is not really stamping on any grapes whatsoever, not even one. She is getting her workers to do all the hard work for her and stomp down the grapes, where Elaina finally kind of wanted to end the madness, ties everybody up. She even says, you lied about the origin and that is fraudulent, so this case could be taken to court. Note that she is holding the wine finally. This is not gonna end well. Like, people are definitely interesting when they're drunk, but can you imagine if half the people in that pub had magical powers? Yeah. Elaina is now finally drinking the wine, where she says it is delicious. The Gramps is getting angry, where this isn't what fetishism should all be about. He's more angry because a woman's feet haven't touched the grapes, and we do know there's people with foot fetishes out there. But he's more angry because there's a load of men who have stomped on these grapes instead, where that's not what fetishism is. Rosemary's workers start to throw grapes at Gramps because he's obviously offending her, and they start to defend her. A tipsy Elaina is drinking wine, unbeknownst to the fact that everybody is starting to throw grapes at one another. There is this massive grape fight going on, and it really is coming down to the drunk witch, where she uses her magic to lift up the baskets of grapes, and it becomes like almost a missile launcher, where they kind of launch tons and tons of grapes at absolutely everybody. Both sides end up knocked out on the floor. We now return to Gramps and his grandson, where he tells him the rest of the story, that everybody was so knocked out when they all came to, Elaina had left, and the festival became a tradition. The two villagers were now peaceful. They now kind of came together, learnt their differences, and it does end with quite a nice little image of Elena's label on the mantelpiece, just how angry she really was. The boy asks what happened to Rosemary. Gramps is like, that's a story for another time, but we see Rosemary. Rosemary's the woman in the bucket who is stamping grapes still, and it even ends with him kind of saying it's time to go inside, and she smiles at him. So, not quite sure why he couldn't have just said, well, Rosemary's over there. So definitely a fun episode, back to our normal structure of having two stories interlinked by a theme. This week's theme definitely being divides and overcoming your divisions. It's a nice theme overall. I think it's definitely a great morale that two countries who obviously had a war between them ended up not needing that wall in the end. They overcame their differences and now they work peacefully together. And again, the same with these two villagers. Just two stories that have the same underlying link, which is great. The Journey of Elaina is definitely an anime which I get to chill out with. It's definitely my chill out one for the week, and we get to see the stories go by. Anime about tales, narratives, and underlying linking themes. It doesn't really seem too heavily plot focused on Elaina herself. In the meantime of her doing all this, we are slowly seeing her grow as a person. We're seeing character development, but it's not the forefront of what the anime is about. This anime is about Elena's journeys. It's about the places she visits and the people she sees, the different things that go on around her. It's not really about Elaina having an end goal. Her goal is travelling. There's not an end goal in this sense. She just wants to travel and let the world take her wherever she wants, and it has been an amazing 7 episodes so far. We have 5 episodes left before the end of the season, so I am curious to see what happens and where we go for the next 5 episodes. Are we even going to see Elaina go home at some point to her parents? Interesting. So many different questions I have that I'm very curious to see where the anime road takes us when it comes to Journey of Elaina. Again, thank you guys for tuning in weekly, and hopefully you guys as well are enjoying this series. It's definitely a fun one to sit back with. Channel release schedule: Sunday, Monday, you can tune in and see me rip apart Moriarty the Patriot and study all the details, the English law, the Victorian history. Very fun one to do. Monday, Tuesday, come and see Golden Kamuy season 3. Definitely shaping up to be a great season. Wednesday morning, Ikebukuro Westgate Park. Very similar to Elaina in the sense that it's episodic, but we are definitely now taking a turn for the plot here. Things getting very serious now. Noodles takes its place Wednesday, Thursdays. Again at the turning point. Quite a few of these animes now at turning points this season. And Friday is Journey of Elaina. One which isn't really at a turning point as a sense, we're just more episodic and we're following this one through. Definitely having fun with it. So I hope you guys are having a good week. Don't forget to comment below your favourite red-headed character. If you're not already, subscribe to the channel and hop over to the Discord server so you guys can stay in the loop with anything channel related. So I hope you guys are having a great day. It was a great episode and I hope to see you all again next week. Have a good day, guys. Bye bye.